officially start. Okay, we are officially starting. I'm Russ McBride. I am an assistant professor here at the University of California, Merced. I teach a lot of entrepreneurship classes, and I'm here just for a second to introduce Luke Cooper, who I'm super delighted that we have here today. He's willing to come all the way out from, I guess, Baltimore. I thought you were coming from Boulder, but you're from Baltimore. It's a different bee city. That's much further away, which is really generous of him. And I'm really, really happy he came here. You're going to see he's super enthusiastic. He's the first Black entrepreneur to raise more than $1 million and sell for more than 10 million. He's done that twice. The first for a company, a cybersecurity company that he sold for $55 million. And the second is a number I can't disclose, but let's just say that he raised 7 million and sold it for an 11 times multiple. So, if you're bad at math, you will not know how much he sold the company for. I'm going to mention, instead of all the amazing things that he's done in his business life, I just want to talk about what he's done in his year off. So in the last year off, he bought a house, drove across the country, went to Big Sur, coached 250 hours of kids basketball. On the side, raised 23 million in investment fund money, led by his partner Farouk. He wrote a book, or is still writing a book, I guess it's almost done, called Mud to Magic. Did 100 hours of yoga and meditation, completed 800 hours of advisory work to a bunch of startups, raised over 1 million for 15 Black entrepreneurs, 3 in Baltimore. Angel invested $500,000, invested in crypto, did 2 company acquisitions, and founded Latimer, a $500 million fund focused on Black founders. 60 million of that is secured, and celebrated his 45th birthday. So it was a very boring year off for him. And without any further introduction, here is Luke Cooper.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to see you guys. It's so good to see everybody in this room and everybody online. Yeah, I don't see the names, but that's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm super happy to be here. I'm looking forward to talking to you about my story, about some of the great things that entrepreneurship can bring. And I'm particularly happy to be telling this story to UC Merced, right? Because I'm one of you, right? The kids that come through this institution are first-time college students in many cases. I was a first-time college student. And we'll get into all of these things in my background and everything else, but I wanted to first say thank you. And it's so good that we're here in, COVID, we're able to be together. This hasn't been the case in a long time. So I'm very aware and appreciative of that as well. And thank you for everybody joining online. I hope to, engage you as well and, and have your questions and everything else. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about my journey from the mud to the magic that Russ described. We're going to talk about some principles that are going to help you navigate this year as students, as well as your life as you think about entrepreneurship and all the great things that starting a thing can bring. And then I'm going to tell you about some of the things I'm working on and ways that we might be able to get involved. So first, you might be wondering, like, this is my bio, right? You might be wondering why I'm wearing gold chains, but the more important question to ask is why is 85% of all the money in venture, 150 billion, going to just one group? Right? Why is that? I'm the first, as Russ mentioned, I'm the first Black founder in the state of Maryland to ever raise more than $1 million and sell a company for more than 10, and I've done that twice. I'm the first to raise $7 million. I got my MBA from Babson, my law degree at Syracuse. I've done coursework at Chicago, all great things, right? But that's not where the story started, right? That's not how I started. That's not my beginning. All right, my beginning and why I say that the things in me are exactly the same things in you is because my beginning was rough, right? My beginning didn't begin with a lot of resources and people around me to help me get from the mud to the magic. 3 things really shaped the narrative arc in my life as a 12-year-old boy. First, my dad went away to jail for 20 years. I had to testify in the trial because of drugs and other things that he was doing. The second thing that happened was I got into this program called NIFTY, National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship, and I built solar powered microwaves. And it was the first time that I built this healthy self-esteem in myself of how to do something on a small scale that created value on a big scale. And it showed me that I didn't have to do the things that like my relatives were doing that, that might've been wrong. And then the third thing that happened was my mom took us up on this tiny Cessna airplane. And we flew around parts of New York and Connecticut. And I remember, seeing my project housing where I grew up. And it looked so tiny, right? And it was the first time that I recognized that where I wasn't who I was. Those are different things fundamentally. And I think that the experiences that the professors here are trying to give us are ones that enhance our perspective in the same way that mine was in that moment. But you need a lot of things to start a company. You need a lot of things to be successful in a company. And I'm going to talk about some of those things, but one of the core things that you need is resilience, right? I'm tough, right? And that toughness is not because I just want to be tough, right? It's the circumstances under which I grew up that made me resilient in the same ways that if you're from nearby and you grew up on a farm without resources, you grow up understanding what it's like to get by with little resources. And so those things are exactly fertile ground for building a company, for starting a thing, for leading a group of people who are focused on the same goals as you. And I think the folks here at UC Merced have that in leaps and bounds, and I'm excited to talk about ways that I can help you tap into it more. So we're going to talk about a lot of things, right? But I want to go through a few growth principles that I think, will help to students who are interested in entrepreneurship, wanting to be more engaged, not really sure how to do it, understanding that it's difficult, right? Some of these principles will help you navigate that, right? Like the first thing that I talk about is acceptance, that this journey will be hard, right? It's going to be a challenging journey. There are a lot of sleepless nights. There are a lot of dark nights. There are a lot of, moments of stark uncertainty as well, right? And you just don't get to control those, right? But what you do get to do is bring your whole self to everything that you do as an entrepreneur, right? And so when I was starting out at Fixed, in the first month, in the first 30 days of starting the company, we were struck with stage 4 cancer. Our daughter, who was 4 then, right? We had no idea that this was going to happen. We were dealing with all kinds of things in the business itself, right? Trying to figure out like who our customer is going to be and like, what market we're going to sell into and all these other normal things that are just, flatly hard. And after a routine pediatrician visit on a Friday afternoon, we learned that our 4-year-old daughter, had a Wilms tumor that had, taken over her kidney. We spent a year in chemotherapy radiation after, 2 surgeries, and we made it out alive, and she's healthy. She has 1 less kidney, but she's very healthy and, living her best life. But part of, my success through that, sort of challenging, time in our lives was just the acceptance that this is going to be a very difficult journey. And that the things that, happen in a startup you don't always get to choose what those things are, right? But you get to choose how you show up, and acceptance that it's going to be hard is a critical, factor to being successful in a startup or starting anything, quite frankly. And after we talk about these, I want to pause and I want you guys to ask me 1,000 questions. My style is casual, meant to, sort of, talk about, at a high level, my experiences and some things that I think can help students here, but also I think the best, sort of interactions come from questions when you are puzzling through how to actually do the things that we're talking about. So the next growth principle I'll talk about is, getting mad, but staying in the room, right? Because again, it's difficult. It's really, really difficult to start anything, but it's the most rewarding thing that you can do. And, as a Black entrepreneur, as a Latino entrepreneur, as a woman entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur that comes from limited means, whose family, is first generation immigrant, right? like you're going to be faced with all kinds of things, all kinds of biases that, people tell you that are limiting and that prevent you from, starting anything. Right. And you've got to find ways to sort of, engage the problem, right? So when investors are talking to you, they're going to give you feedback. They're going to tell you things that oftentimes, don't make sense, or if they do make sense, you're because of how they, were biased in the beginning of that conversation, you might not receive that feedback, right? But I think the first thing to do is like really listen to the feedback that your professors are giving you, that like a potential investor might be giving you, feedback that a potential customer might be giving you, and listen to hear it. And then once you hear it, right, validate. Like everything that you do in a startup needs to be validated. Every decision that you make about, market direction, about product direction needs to be validated or invalidated. And sometimes when you're meeting investors for the first time, or you're, established investors that are going to be part of what you're doing, they're not going to agree with you. They're not going to agree with your perspective. They're not going to agree with, your direction of the company. They might not even agree with your leadership style, right? And those are opportunities for you to grow and you to learn, right? And I'll give you an example. When I was starting Fixed, my last company, we had an advisory group, and the advisory group, constituted basically, all white males, because all of our investors were white males. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's not a bad thing per se, but there was a level of sort of concern that I was dealing with as a founder, because they would reach out to my team. They would go reach out to my management team. They would reach out to my CFO and have side conversations, right? So it was a behavior as a young, 30, I think I was 35 or 36 at the time. It's a very difficult thing to navigate, right? And like, you guys are students, online mostly. You guys are students, and you're going to be dealing with these things for the first time. And I couldn't even imagine like trying to navigate that as a 22-year-old or a 23-year-old. I was 35 and my stomach was in knots, having to sit there and painfully, explain to those investors why I wasn't going to allow them to just run over me. I wasn't going to allow them to reach out to my team and interact with my team over the CEO and, over the things that I was describing to them. Right. And so those things made me upset. Right. And it got them upset as well. Right. But I never left the room. I sat there and we had that conversation, that very difficult conversation. And as a result of that, I grew the ability to stand in front of the most scary thing that you can think of and have a difficult conversation about the thing I care the most about, which was my company, right? And like how we got from the mud to the magic. And because I didn't leave that room, those investors, they grew respect for me, right? They didn't reach out to my team anymore. They didn't do those things anymore. And they got a better understanding of the kind of leader that I was growing into, right? And so leaders are not going to, ever, avoid getting mad. You're going to get mad as a leader, right? But how you actually navigate that and, and share, articulate your frustrations to your team or to whoever while staying in the room is going to determine your altitude. And so certainly one of the ones I really live by. So the third growth principle that I want to talk about, and I purposely didn't talk a lot about myself in this presentation because I want you guys to ask questions. And I don't like this idea of, I'm here and you're here, right? We're all on the same level. All the things that I've accomplished in my short career, education, startups, exits, et cetera, are all things that are possible and achievable for the students here, right? But seeing with different eyes will allow you to identify talent, identify opportunities, identify adjacencies to what you're doing already that can catapult you even further, really, really rapidly, right? And, it's one of the things that I really push my team to do, when we're looking at new things, right? But a lot of times we come as humans with these biases, or we're just born with them. Our biases are a result of our caveman heritage, right? Like, and they're good. They kept us alive for a long time, right? It's the bias that tells you that a guy who might be, wearing gold chains at night, walking across the street might be scary or going to mug you, right? That's not always accurate. That's not always true, right? And if you have that perspective, you might not hire a great person that can then completely change fundamentally, the order of magnitude of your business and where it can scale, right? And so here's a great example. Sharae is just like you as well. She's just like me. Sharae was one of my earliest hires. Single Black mom from Baltimore, never went to college, had great, sort of intuition around customer experience, but did lack the training, right? But I saw in her greatness. I saw in her this ambition to be a leader, this ambition to do great things and to do more. And so we just kept throwing things at her. We kept giving her more, right? And in my mind, that is the responsibility of any institution, any organization. So, for the students at Merced, your faculty, your teachers, the administration should be doing its best to give you all the experiences that it can, right? And in the same way that I did with Sharae. But by me seeing with different eyes, I was able to see past the fact that she didn't have a college degree. I was able to see past that, she was challenged, economically, financially. By the end of our journey, she was running our largest account. US Cellular was one of our largest accounts. Our product was really an enterprise SaaS, repair platform, right? So, most people don't know this, but big companies, they spend like $18 billion a year on, all of their mobile assets, all the things that they use to manage their business, to grow their business, to dictate, the growth in their business. And they don't really know how to deal with that, right? Because it's a lot of devices. Home Depot, for example, 17,000 devices that they use to manage their total business, right? But so US Cellular was very important to us, very, very important to us as a customer. Not only was she running that account super well, but by the end of our journey, it was leading to most of our profitability. Not only was it leading to most of our profitability, but in the midst of raising my Series A, guess who came in with $1 million check as a result of how well we serviced that account and how well we supported the client and all their additional clients. It was US Cellular, right? And it was a significant portion of our Series A. And that led to more investment, right? So seeing the world with different eyes will illuminate, the possibility of what can be and what people have to offer. Right. And if you just see, what's in front of you, you'll never really get that. So I think seeing with different eyes is super important. Even as you go about your day-to-day talking to professors and interacting with them in class, right? Like Russ McBride is one of the professors here. He's got an incredible background, right? And if you see him as just a professor, if you see him as just a dude that teaches an entrepreneurship class, you're going to miss the point, right? You're going to miss out on his experiences, building hedge funds in Singapore, right? Like maybe there's some finance element that you're interested in, you're intrigued about, and you want to go, work with him on that, right? Those are by seeing people, by seeing things and opportunities with different eyes, you'll be able to ferret that out, tease it out, and then ask the appropriate question. So I think that's a very important growth principle as well. I got a bunch of these, but I'll do one more, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. And I touched on this earlier, but adjacent to seeing with different eyes is bringing your whole self to work, right? Into what you're doing. And so if you want to start something, if you want to build a product, a company, whatever those things are, right? Who you are as a person and what you come from, those things matter. And those things in many cases will dictate your product market lock, how much you actually understand the problem and how closely knit that problem is to the market that you're chasing and all those other things. Imagine an Indonesian woman trying to solve maternal issues, maternity problems for a Nigerian woman or a Nigerian group of women, right? That doesn't make sense. You want, the people who have that problem, who understand the unique nature of that culture to be solving problems. And so I want the person who is closest to that problem to bring their whole selves to work, their whole selves to that problem, because in bringing your whole self, you're able to generate significant outcomes, right? So let me tell you what bringing my whole self to the things I did, what that resulted in. And so with Fixed, we were able to, in many cases with Fixed, I was the first, Black CEO, Black founder, manager, all those things that any of my team ever had. Right. And it was challenging, right? Because we're humans and we want to fit in. Right. We tend to want to do things that like make us similar to other people. But the things that are different about you, the things that are unique about you, I think those things are the things that result in, are part of your success or the reason for your success. And so bringing my whole self to my work led to identification of certain pockets of opportunities that the market just was missing, right? Opportunities to support small businesses, opportunities to, expand our product through, through pockets of the economy that hadn't been thought of before, right? I was bringing my whole experience as an African-American male to that product and to that market. And this is what it resulted in. It resulted in a $500 million outcome for Assurant. Right? They bought our company, and within 200 days, the company, that division, our product that we sold, was doing more than $500 million of new revenue for them. It's a $10 billion company, so $500 million in new revenue is material, significant, right? They don't get there unless Luke Cooper brings his whole self to that problem, to the conversation, to the articulation of how I saw the problem and the opportunity I saw for them, right? Like my way, I'm aggressive. I'm an ambitious entrepreneur. And so when I see an opportunity, I go after it, right? And when I saw the opportunity for Assurant, who acquired us, to create an $18 billion, something out of this $18 billion market, I chased it. I chased it fervently. And I used all the same principles that I used, growing up in urban America, right? In the inner city, about hustle and about finagling your way, smooth talking your way into a room that you don't belong into, right? That because I look like this, because I dress like this, because I am who I am, I might not otherwise have gotten into. So I snuck my way, right? We were running out of cash. We were within 30 days of cash zero, right? Where we were going to, no payroll. I had at that point, 25 employees in HQ that worked for us, that were all, had houses and families and everything else. Right. But bringing my whole self helped to alleviate that problem. Right. Because my whole self told me, if you hustle here, Luke, you'll be able to convince them that this is a market they need to invest in. And that by investing in your company, growing your company this way, this is how they access it. Right. And so there was a VIP reception in Las Vegas at the CES. I didn't have money. We didn't have money to go. So I flew out on a Southwest flight. And remember, I told you the very first time I'd flown, I was 12. And I was on this tiny Cessna airplane hovering over parts of Connecticut and New York and looking down like, wow. That was the first and only time at that time that I'd ever even sat in the cockpit, because they allowed that, me and my sister. And so here I am, running out of money. CES, the Consumer Electronics Showcase, is going on in Las Vegas. And I knew the CEO was going to be there. They were having this VIP reception. I sneak into the VIP reception. I knew one or two people. So I just talked to them, a bunch, and then, found my way inside the event. I beeline to the CEO. I began to, articulately express to him the opportunity that existed within the enterprise space. I began to explain to him that, we had built a very successful company that was attacking this problem. I began to explain to him that, we could be a conduit for him to go achieve more revenue, right? More growth for their company. And so he hooked me up with a sponsor. And within 30 days of that, we were under LOI, right? The best part of that story, though, is, again, like bringing your whole self and all the tools, all the things that make Luke up, led to the success there. But the best part of that story is that, on the way out of that event in Las Vegas, I bump into a friend of mine who happened to be flying back to the East Coast. And he's like, Luke, do you want to ride? I'm staying at the Strata at this point, which is the cheapest hotel in Vegas. I'm flying Southwest for sure. I hadn't even bought my ticket because I was going to wait to make sure I got the lowest price. And then he asked me, do you want to ride? I'm like, what are you talking about? We're in Las Vegas. I live in Baltimore. He's like, no, I flew my private plane out here. And so I hop in his private plane the next day, and and it's the second time that I sat in the cockpit on the way back from this acquisition, this conversation about acquisition. And again, like, I don't get there. I don't have those set of experiences or any of those things unless I bring my whole self. Right? We can talk about a lot of things, right? Leaning into being data driven, like, it's an important thing, right? Like, when you're trying to figure out, do I start a thing, and when do I start it? How do I start it? Those are all important things to think about and to do, right? And things that we could talk about, for days, right? But there's a very finite way to do customer discovery. There's a very deliberate way to do product discovery and problem discovery. There's a very fixed way to do those things. These other things are things that students that come from underrepresented backgrounds, that come from sort of challenging economic environments, our confidence is different. It can be different, right? Because we oftentimes don't. Not only do we not see examples of folks in front of us that have done the things that we want to do, right? How am I the first Black entrepreneur in Maryland to sell a company for more than $10 million twice? Like that, there was a person who did that, who did something like that. He didn't raise $1 million, but that was in 1999, right? So the last Black entrepreneur to raise anything and sell anything was 1999, and then me in 2020, right? And I was one of 3 Black entrepreneurs in 2020 to sell a company for more than $10 million, right? That in the whole country. And so those are challenging statistics, right? That we bring to the table in every conversation that we have. But the things that make you up, the things that make me up, the things that are part of our journey that we had to overcome, those very things are the reasons why you will succeed, right? And tapping into all those skill sets that you have developed as a result of the hardships that you've had to endure are part of bringing your whole self to any problem. Right. Think another example. When we were exiting the business, one of the things that we noticed was that there was a small pocket of customers that we just could not get good ratings from. Right. We just, no matter how hard we tried, no matter what we did, no matter how we modified the product, we just could not get good ratings out of a whole class of folks. And so I just dug. We had a base of like 1.4 million customers, and I just started to dig. I just started to call people and talk to them. Right. Because that's part of being an entrepreneur too, leaning into hard, difficult conversations and just engaging, right? You've got to be comfortable with that. And so I began talking to people, and I found out that, the lion's share of the folks that, we were getting bad results from were by and large Black and Latino, right? And and when I would ask them, like, well, why did you give me a 4? Right? We repaired your phone in 20 minutes. All the data is there, sitting there. Like, why didn't we get a 5? It's like, well, I just don't rate anything a 5, right? Right? Because this is how we are as a people. Like, you've got to really impress us, because there's a lack of trust, and products have not always worked well for us or been designed for us. And so we don't, rate things very highly unless it comes with something free, or like something great happened, like miraculously outside of the actual service that you're seeking. That little germ of information is so valuable to product development, right? When people are talking about how best to think about a product, oftentimes they're not thinking holistically about, whether or not A, they're bringing their whole self to the problem, or B, they're actually thinking about the whole people that are on the other side of that transaction and how they might be affected, what benefits and services and things that they might want out of that product. Right? Thinking this way will make you make better products. Thinking this way will make you make better companies, and thinking this way will make you make yourself better. So bringing your whole self is a big part of what I'm about, and a big part of my message today. There are lots of things that we can talk about. I want to pause here for some Q&A. I'd love to just hear from the student body. I spent a lot of time today on campus, and I just think this place is very special, and I would just love to hear from you. What I'm up to now. So these are just some of the things I'm doing now. Preface Ventures, as Russ mentioned, is a $23 million fund that I launched recently, focused on Black and Brown founders, making direct investments in them. Latimer Ventures is a $500 million VC fund of funds that I'm raising as well. We've got 60 million of that secured. I'm writing a book called Mud to Magic about my life, about some of the things we've talked about, because I want to inspire more generations of entrepreneurs that look like me, that don't look like me, women that are in insufferable situations, right? The 15 entrepreneurs that I'm helping, I've helped them through just incredibly challenging circumstances. And I think I can help even more people by elaborating on some of those principles that got me from the mud to the magic. And then, you know, my family, veganism, yoga, meditation are all things that I use to take care of myself, right? So every time that I have an opportunity, I can bring my whole self to every problem that I'm addressing. I'm really thankful for this time to be with you today. I can't wait to hear your questions. And thank you. Sure.
One is, how important is personality when hiring individuals versus their technical ability?
Well, it depends on the position for sure, right? You know, certainly a VP of engineering, you want to have some personality, right? Because he's going to be hiring other engineers, right? But you know, engineer, your full stack engineer that's you know handling your front end, like personality might not be the most important thing. A product manager, very different, right? A product manager has to have a great personality, because in my mind, a good product manager has three things. They have the mind of an engineer, they've got the heart of a designer, and they've got the tongue of a diplomat. That means that they can talk to people and like convince their engineering team that, hey, I know that I don't have all the specs. I know I don't have all the data for this decision that we're going to make, but can you just go ahead in your spare time and build out this feature for me so that we can test this other thing that will then give me some more feedback and some more, you know, direction. And so it really depends on the position. But my way, I try to take personality out of it. I think most hiring decisions are personality based. It's a big personality, you know, contest. And so the way that we do it and the way I advise others to do it is totally blind. We don't look at LinkedIn profiles. You know, and here's what the benefit of this. By the time we left Fixed, like 50% of our workforce was Black or Latino. Like this, like full stop for a second, right? Like 40% of our leadership team were Black males. Like that doesn't happen anywhere in the Valley, in Oakland. That doesn't happen anywhere, right? And so the benefit to, you know, ignoring some of the biases that are constantly coming in is that you get a more diverse company with people like Shalray that can really help you grow.
Did being a ethnic minority help you or hurt you when interacting with investors or sponsors?
Great question. Both. All right. As you can imagine, in some circumstances, it helped. Right. There were, you know, Bob Smith was one of my investors. He ran, you know, significant part of T. Rowe Price, and he was great. He's the whitest white guy you'd ever meet. Right. He's more white than Russ. Right. But he's great. He was great. He would spend time with me. He understood that startups took a long time and that Black founders, you know, might have it especially bad in some circumstances. So I'm going to, you know, take a couple extra minutes here to really help Luke understand like sales playbook development, to help Luke understand like, you know, how to, you know, think about like funnel management and M&A and, you know, board texture, all these things that, you know, even though I was a lawyer, right? Even though I had some experience, like it didn't matter when it's your company, when it's your butt on the line, it's completely different. So like there were great investors that, you know, where my heritage, my race, my background, you know, really helped me. And there were times when it didn't, you know, but I think those are opportunities. You know, I was talking earlier with a small group about a time that we were raising our seed round. We were raising 1.2 million in a seed round, and we had closed 650,000 of it from a very prominent investor. And he was challenging. He didn't trust. I don't know why he wrote a check to me, but he didn't trust anything I said. He didn't trust anything about me. Every day he called me for 30 days straight about everything under the sun, from, you know, whether or not we were going to close this deal, or, you know, what the funnel looked like, contracting, fundraising. He just would bother me with things every single day, to the point where it was, you know, obnoxious. And so I went up to New York and I met with him at his office in Trump Towers. And it was another difficult meeting, right? But at the end of that meeting, I slid to him basically his money back. And I said, listen, we are misaligned as it relates to how we think about, this company and maybe even culturally. And so I think the best decision now is to get, he was completely floored. Right? That doesn't happen. For those of you that don't know startups, that doesn't happen in startup land. You don't give money back. It's your only soldiers. And you need those soldiers to go out there and win for you, right? And so you don't normally give money back, but I made that decision, right? And part of that decision, right, is because of what I started with in the first place, right? The things that, use the force, like the things that are in you, those are the things that are going to drive your success, right? And when, you guys listen to hip hop music, you listen to Roddy Ricch talking about standing 10 toes down. That's what he's talking about, right? And I learned that in the hood, right? You don't run. Right, you see a problem, you see a bully, you deal with that as however you have to deal with that, right? But you don't run, get mad, but stay in the room, right? And I did those things. I gave him the money back. The hard decision to do that. It took our runway from 9 months down to 3. But what did that force us to do? It forced Share, it forced Eric, it forced Matt, it forced Isaac to start thinking about, well, Luke, we got these customers over here. Right, they're paying us annually. Why don't we give them a discount for paying the next year up front? Oh yeah, great idea. Let's do that. That's like half of it, right? Then what if we like went out and did some creative venture debt? Oh, okay, that's another idea. Let's go explore that. And by the end of that, we were flush with cash and well off. And that investor, I didn't think about him anymore. So there are going to be moments when you're challenged and like your race, your background, the fact that you're an immigrant, all those things are going to play into a person's decision. You've got to ignore them. You've got to ignore them.
Do you think it takes a special breed of people that can start up a business? And what do you have an advice for someone who is in the earlier stage of like how do you inspire them to get into the opportunity of starting a business or developing a product? Like the beginning of how you started.
Sure.
Might be inspiring.
Sure, absolutely. First, I think anybody can start a business, start a thing. Not every business is going to be a venture-backed business, right? Not everything's going to be, a license deal, right? Some things are just, a product. Some things are just a retail business that, makes money and creates a good lifestyle for you, right? Like that is the pathway to success in this country, like building and owning your things, right? So I encourage everybody to just try it, right? To start somewhere, but you got to just start, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs, right, like will fail early, right? Because the number one problem why entrepreneurs fail is because early scale. We think, oh, I got an idea, let me just go run at it. Well, that's not the best way to do it. Like there's actually, and Russ and others, I'm sure, teach all this stuff. There's a very methodical way to de-risk an idea that you have over time so that by the time you leave your job to go do this, it's not even a risk. It's not even by the time that we were serious about fundraising for Fix, it wasn't a risk. We had figured out, our competitors are doing something different. There's an $18 billion enterprise market that nobody has. You need tooling to get there. Okay, if we had those things, how do we get there? Well, let me go ask. Let me go ask a bunch of enterprises. Let me go spend time with Coca-Cola. I did that. I used one of my relationships to find my way into Coca-Cola. And I spent, the better part of 2 weeks with them, living with them and looking at what they were doing, right? There's a cost to that, of course, right? It's my time, but there's no monetary cost to that. There was no monetary cost of me learning. And as a founder, you have to be biased toward learning and action, period, point blank. Your entire wheelhouse, your entire mind has to be focused on how do I absorb more information about the thing I'm trying to attack, the problem I'm trying to solve. Because more information is going to make you smarter. More information is going to bring you closer to a thing that, is more likely to succeed than fail. And so there's a very specific way how to de-risk. I mean, customer discovery, problem discovery, like deeply understanding the problem. I talk to entrepreneurs all the time and, I'll ask them 3 questions about the problem they're solving and all of it starts to break down, right? Because entrepreneurs, we love things that we build. We love the ideas. We love, the philosophy of it, right? And, those are great things to think about and to muse on, right? But those are not, great companies, right? That's not the way to build anything great, right? You got to actually take some action. And I think part of it is like trial and error at the very fundamental step. And then once you get to a place where, okay, this is going to work, I'm going to have some revenue, then you might think about leaving your job. But until then, we can't take those risks. All right.
Yeah, so two things. Would you mind telling the Coca-Cola story? Because it's
Sure.
another amazing example of you leveraging the tiny crack in the door and working your way into, I think it was the CTO. of
I did.
Coca-Cola, right?
I did.
And I got
did.
another
Yeah. I mean,
question.
yeah. I mean, so I did that, right? I basically leveraged, I went to Syracuse, right? I think Merced is actually ranked higher than Syracuse in like a bunch of categories, by the way. You guys are in a very, very special place. But I did that. I leveraged one of my relationships at Syracuse to get in touch with the CTO at Coca-Cola, hit pay dirt. You know, he said, sure, I'll help you. Come down. I can't guarantee you that I'm going to sell you anything or buy anything from you, but I'm happy to answer your questions, talk to you, spend time with you. And so I, first told him who I was, right? Because again, bring your whole self. Like Russ said, the door was cracked. And so what are you going to do in those moments when the door's cracked a little bit? You're going to come in and like, oh, here's a bunch of data. Sure. But they heard that already from somebody else. Like, what's different about you, right? What was different about me was that my story, what I came from, who I am, right? And that told him that I was resilient, right? That I was committed to this problem in a way that other entrepreneurs weren't, and that I was going to work like hell to solve it. And so him taking a chance on me wasn't really taking a chance. It was like, all right, even if he doesn't get it perfectly right, he's going to keep trying and we're going to work together to get there. So giving them that level of confidence like really led to a lot of the success we have with Coca-Cola, and they were one of our biggest, earliest customers. But the story I love to tell is about T. Rowe Price, right? Because T. Rowe Price, the door was a little bit open. They were a customer of ours. They're $1 trillion asset manager, and one of our investors worked there. He ran T. Rowe, and so I said I could use that as leverage to make a conversation happen and then ultimately sell my product into T. Rowe. But that's not real signal. You got to be careful, right? Because just because I can call Russ and Russ knows, everybody at, Google and Logitech, and he can get my product in those places, doesn't mean that like it's accepted by the market. Doesn't mean that, they care about me or they care about my product, right? So, you've got to do the hard work of actually trying to get that signal yourself. And so I did that. I said, I'm not going to leverage my relationship in this situation to get me a client. All right. I'm going to leverage it to get me a conversation. Got a conversation going. That led to a bunch of other conversations with the chief information security officer. We developed a great relationship. He gave me so much product input around security components to our product, all the things that like made the product an enterprise ready thing, right? Because it wasn't really enterprise ready until we started to get, traction within the enterprise. And those conversations led to great product development, and product choices. It led to T. Rowe ultimately becoming a customer. They did become a customer after we did those things and we proved out the market, right? It led to this person becoming an investor in the company at a time when we were running out of cash. Right. He just came in. He's like, oh, I know so much about the company. I spent so much time with you. Are you even around? I was like, well, sort of. We're running out of money. Oh, here's $100K. Just like that. Right. And so like leaning into these problems, having difficult conversations and showing up as your whole self, you will unveil so many things from people that you just didn't see before.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I got one more question. So there's this whole field of entrepreneurship scholarship, which oftentimes diverges radically more than the scholars think from hands-on practical entrepreneurship. But one of the topics lately that's been red hot is the topic of uncertainty entrepreneurship for the last few years or so. And it sounds like your primary approach when you're dealing with uncertain context is to friggin' dig into the data, validate, try to get answers, try to run experiments, try to get as much information as you can to
That's right.
in an uncertain environment. There are times, and that's awesome. It sounds like you do a better job of that than a lot of other people, because a lot of other people get into uncertain environments. So like, well, let's roll the dice and go this way.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times where like you can't get the data you need, you can't ultimately get a definitive answer. You
Sure.
have a bunch of vagueness.
Mm-hmm.
you're not sure how to interpret the evidence, you're not sure who to talk to, and you talk to people, and you still look at it, you don't get that. So you're stuck in this uncertain context. So I guess my question is, what do you do when you're stuck in a definitive uncertain context and you've got to make a decision?
I think you're going to be there a lot in a startup, right? First of all, you never have all the data. I mean, if you get to a place where you're like 70% data, like you have 70% of the data, you should make a decision, because that's about as best as it gets. You know, you're think about it this way, Russia, you're doing something that has never been done before, right? In most cases, particularly with a tech, startup, you're doing something that this doesn't exist. So there isn't data that is easily, sort of capturable about those things. What I try to do is use, proxy data, right? Like what a normal consumer might do when they're met with an app that helps them think about housing, right? Short-term housing. I could probably glean like how they might react to my thing by just watching what happens on Airbnb. Not Airbnb now, right? Airbnb when they launched, right? Because we do this all the time. We compare ourselves to companies that are already in existence and successful. Like compare yourself to the company back then, and that proxy data sometimes can nudge you in a direction or two, right? But I'm actually, you don't always get out of that so easily. None of these things are like easy answers to like helping you find the data. I think they're things that help you understand like what field of decisions you need to make at that particular stage, right? And so if I'm in a product stage, right, I think companies are only ever in 4 stages. You're in product, you're in scaling and optimization, and then M&A, exit, IPO, something like that. But in products phase, if you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to go sell 1,000 of these and get 1 million customers, you're going to fail, right? Because you should be thinking about the product itself, and you should not move from that phase until you get, some level of conviction that it's going to work, or that, hey, I can repeatedly get customers. Those are the kinds of clues that tell you that this is a thing that's going to work. But, in the early days, you just don't have enough data. And in today's world, between Airtable, where you can build databases very easily, Wix, I mean, where you can spin up websites super quickly and just like test the value proposition. Those to me are tools that allow you to stay in that stage, right? Like, oh, I don't know, I got 50% of the data because like this value proposition that I've got on this website is telling me that only 50% of the people are giving me an email address. Well, let me change it. Okay, now I get 60. Let me change it again. Oh, I got 70. What am I doing right? Right. And those are the clues that then tell you, okay, now it's time to build a thing. Right. And entrepreneurs, oftentimes, I'm sure you see this a lot, Russ, we just go build things. And that's the role of the engineer. We got to remember that entrepreneurship is about, critical thinking about the steps that you need to take to get to that magic.
Cool, thanks. Any other questions online?
If I may have a question.
Sure.
Because of course, it's very important to figure out whether you have a signal. How do you make a decision? No, that's not the way to go. I mean, how do you? Because you invest your desire to say, well, I think there's a golden line here.
Mm-hmm.
You dig it, and then at some point you say, no, there's no. How do you make this decision?
Yeah, I think doing one thing in a startup is really, really hard, because like you've never done that thing before and no one's ever done it. Doing 2 things or 3 things is not like 2 or 3 times harder. It's exponentially harder, right, in a startup. So my default position is typically one thing at a time, right? One thing at a time. The way I like to think about it is like, what is the most foundational, critical assumption I've made about this idea, this business, this product direction? Like, and then like work to go validate or invalidate that. And then don't get off that step, because like entrepreneurship is about discipline also, right? And as the other side of being a founder is like you're the CEO, right? And CEOs have to make decisions that are grounded in data, some sort of social awareness, right? And also, like what the environment is like, right? And those are things that like require a level of discipline. And so, as a founder, if you're seeing a bunch of things, right? You're doing a bunch of things. And 2 or 3 of them, or some of them are not working, like you've got to make the hard decision to stop them, even if it means that your product manager is going to be upset with you, or your engineer is going to be upset with you. You're actually protecting their interests, because the equity that they have is tied to your success, and you're not going to be successful if you're doing all these other things. Right? We experienced that exact thing, right? So when we first started out, one of the key questions for Fix was, we have this on-demand service, targeting the enterprise, right? A bunch of our investors, that advisory board I was telling you about, the old white dudes were telling me, oh no, you're doing it wrong. You need to offer everyone a way to either, have someone come to them to repair, replace their device and give them the information they need, or send them into a store. And it's like, that's not going to work. People are not going to want to go inside of a store. That's like, pre 2014. And so we tested it when we just put it out there. We made it available in our application where you could choose between going inside of a store or, having someone come to you. And over like a 6 or 7 week period, it was like coming to me was like 4 or 5 to 1. Right. So that told me everything I could have continued to proceed. There was revenue there. So how do you make a decision to stop chasing this small amount of revenue, in favor of more revenue over here, right? It's a matter of resources, right? And if, my starting place in most things is culture, right? Like, what's your culture? Is your culture data driven? If your culture is data driven, you're going to see the data that is telling you to stop doing these 3 or 4 other things and do something else. If your culture is not that, you're gonna do whatever you feel like doing in that moment, right? So I really force and try to get my founders to think about culture almost at the beginning, right at the beginning. Is that helpful?
That kind of building on that, how do you know, or do you have a formula to generate ideas that you can build on and start investigating them? Like, how do you get to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my inspiration actually comes from problems, right? And I think it should come that should be your starting base as well, right? If you chase, products, like you'll just be doing this all the time, right? Because there's a lot of products that come out. There's a lot of clever angles and like, interesting ways to do things a slightly different way, right? But like if you chase problems that have not been solved, like hard problems that have not been solved, and you can find ways to test that, I think those are the things that lead to significant success, right? So I have a backlog of ideas that are all rooted in like big problems and things that I want to solve, right? The disparity between Black and brown founders and white founders is, for example, one of them, right? There's a ton of data on that, right? Like in 2018, 19, there was 150 million of total capital that came into Baltimore, right? Of that 150 million, 6.7 million went to Black founders, right? Full stop. Right. Of the 6.7, 6.5 went to Luke Cooper for his Series A, right? Like that's a problem. That's a big problem, right? Come on in. Yeah, so that's a big problem, right? And so, again, I try to think tactically about problems and break them down with some layer of financial analysis or quantitative analysis, right? Like sometimes we think a problem is a big problem. I want to go, we were talking earlier about your problem with can we talk about that?
Sure.
Let's use your problem, right? We're talking about making it more convenient to take photos and videos in the context of TikTok, right? Like it's a big problem. I want to take a TikTok and it takes me an hour, right? Going back and forth to the phone to get the right angle, right? And so your idea was one of a remote control, right? I don't think that's a bad idea, right? But the way I like to sort of advise entrepreneurs is like, you can't get off of the problem to a solution until you have properly told me you understand that problem, right? And like proper understanding of a problem is, okay, well, how often does that problem occur, right? How painful is it, right? Like, and there's a way to quantify that, right? If you ask 10 people how painful this is, they're not gonna, I don't know. Well, we rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, right? That's one way, right? Same way that doctors ask you about your own pain, right? Then, well, how much are you willing to pay for this problem to go away? If they say nothing, it's not that painful, right? Right. So those are clever ways, I think, to get at like whether or not there's a real problem occurring and whether or not you should, chase that problem, right? Because that's the first step. Once you get past that, you can start to think about like solutions to the problem. But again, there's a range of solutions, to a problem like that. Yeah, these are, yeah.
You're basically out of time. But unless there are more questions on the line. Or here. And I think we're gonna wrap it up.
Great. It's so great being with you today. Thanks so much for the time today. I'm so blown away with all the great things happening on this campus. Thank you.